Hello and welcome back to the channel. I'm Emily, author of the XERUS Galaxy Saga, among other things, and today we are doing part 2 of my How to Write a Novel for Beginners series. I'm really excited for the things that we're going to talk about today, but if you missed part 1, go back and listen to that first. Now, it may not have as many helpful tips as you're going to hear today, very specific things about plot especially, but I do think that it's going to lay a really good foundation if you're interested in writing a novel. So make sure you go watch that first. All right, let's go talk about plot. Today we're going to be talking about plot, and I'm really excited because I enjoy plotting and it's fun for me, but I do think that it can be a little overwhelming, especially for beginners when you're not really sure how to plot or should you plot or all of those different things. So if you'll remember from our last video, I talked about the 3 things that make up a story, and that is plot, character, and author voice. Now, of course, there are more things than that, but those are the main things we're going to be focusing on in this mini-series. Today, as I said, we're going to be looking at plot. But before I even get to what a plot is, I want to talk about the different ways that I know of authors, myself included, who approach plotting. And there's 3 main, categories you could fall into. Now, you're not going to have to put yourself in one of these categories. The best part is that you get to kind of experiment and see which ones you kind of land in best. The 3 of them are outlining, pantsing, and planting. Now, if these sound like really weird terms, it's okay. I am a proud plantser myself, but I'll talk about that in a minute. Now, let's start off with outlining. It is exactly as it sounds, and that is you sit down and you outline usually the entire story to the level that you're most comfortable with. Now, I have friends who outline so much so that it's almost like their first draft. So they'll do maybe paragraphs for each chapter or scene. They'll have a lot of details in their outline, and they'll have so much written there that their second pass through that outline is really kind of like a second draft for them. On the flip side, there is pantsing, and that is literally what it sounds like. You are making this stuff up by the seat of your pants. A kind of subcategory, or maybe you could say co-category with this, is discovery writing, and I'll talk about that in a second. But pantsing is basically not really knowing more than just kind of your vague idea of your story and diving right in. And then planting is a combination of both of those things. So you might pants, you might pant your first section of the novel and then realize you need an outline, so you sit down and do some outlining, or you might do a very, very bare bones outline and then write in the rest yourself. I personally prefer a bit of a hybrid between planting and discovery writing. So what I love to do is come up with a concept. Usually for me, well, I don't even want to give you the term yet because we're not there, but usually I'll come up with like the concept, the first idea, and then I'll let myself just kind of go. I'll write, I'll discover who the characters are, how they're interacting on the page, kind of what the world feels like, and to me, that's the discovery aspect, right? Sometimes I'll go as far as 30,000 words. A little caveat here. Yes, we writers love to talk in word count, and it might be a little confusing, especially if you're new to this whole writing thing. So when we're talking about word count, we're really using a metric that makes it easily understandable for anyone in any genre writing anything. A novella, you can say, is like, 20 to 30,000 words. A novel could be anywhere from, 60,000 words to 218,000 words. And I just pulled that number out of, my last book was that long. But we use words because page numbers is so subjective. You can fit a bunch of different amounts of words on a page. And so saying, well, I wrote 200 pages, is your font size 14? Are you double spacing? What does it look like? It's just easier to go by word count. So if you hear me using that a lot, that's the reason why. And it's something to just kind of familiarize yourself with. If you really want to stick to pages, that's totally fine as well. You might just need to describe a little bit more about, it's a Word document sized page. I'm double spacing. I use 12-point font, Times New Roman, something like that, which is very standard for the industry. So that was kind of a little further out of the beginner lane, but I wanted to bring us in so we understand. Anyways, so I might let myself discovery write for the first 30,000 words. Sometimes that could be upwards of a third of the book. It could be a fourth of the book, depending on how long it's going to be. But I really get into the story and let myself experience it. But I always hit a point where I think, I am not sure what happens next. A lot of the times I will see the ending, but I won't really know what's happening in the middle. And so that's where I need to take a step back and assess a lot of different things, including traditional plot motion. So speaking of, let's hop into a bit more specifics about what a plot looks like. So one question I want us to consider before we really get into the weeds here is, what's so special about plot? This might be a bit of a kind of nebulous feeling question, but it's really crucial for us to consider it, because otherwise you might just think, well, a plot is something that just happens to me while I'm writing, instead of seeing the plot is really pivotal to the experience of writing. Now, granted, this is coming from someone who is a plotter, so I do understand that there are going to be people out there who really just don't want anything to do with plot, and I completely understand that, and I respect that. But I do think that there are things you have to consider, regardless of whether you're calling it plotting or maybe just something like discovery writing or intuitive writing. So, what is so special about plot? A story has to do something. Now, I could tell a story that says, I woke up in the morning, I went to the store, I shopped for groceries, and I came home. Great. That was interesting. Who really cares? Nothing happened. So if we switch it up and we say, well, I woke up in the morning, I went to the store, and then my purse was stolen right as I was going to pay for the groceries. So I had to run after the person who stole it, and then I tripped and I broke my ankle, and then, you get the point, right? The story got interesting when something happened, and most often that thing that happens is a jolt to your character's reality. Now, we're not getting into characters today, but you can kind of see where I'm coming from, right? Without having thought through what's going to happen in my story, it could mean that I end up with a story where nothing happens. And there's nothing worse than a story that's boring and nothing's happening. So the reason why we consider plot to be important is because we need to be telling something with our stories. The beautiful part is that can come out whether you're pantsing, plantsing, outlining, discovery writing, whatever. But as you embark on this journey of writing your first novel, or maybe your third or fourth or whatever novel number this is for you, but you're still beginning, it's important for you to let yourself kind of experiment. Try a story and write it without thinking about the plot. And then try another story, and I'm just talking about like the intros here. You don't have to write the whole book. Try another story where you do think about, okay, this happens, then this happens, then this happens. Use what we're going to talk about in like the actual structure of a plot, and maybe do a little plotting. See if you like it. See if you don't. I think each type of plotter has its strengths and its weaknesses. An outliner, like I tend to be, can find themselves a little bored with the story sometimes because it's all laid out, which is why after I've discovery written, I get really detailed with my plots, but I always leave it open-ended in case I need to change something. I don't make myself stick to that plot. I say, well, okay, let's pivot. Let's do something else. Now, pantser might find themselves having to rewrite quite a bit because as they tell themselves the story through that process of writing, they realize, oh, I didn't account for this thing and this thing, and now I have to make them fit, right? Stuff just comes to them, and that is completely normal. It just means there's a little more revising going on at the end of the process of your first draft into your next subsequent drafts. And then someone like a planster, they can find themselves kind of facing either of those problems. If they've planned too much, maybe some of that excitement is gone because they thought too much about it. But if they maybe don't do enough thinking, then they find themselves stuck and they have to take a step back and plan out their next few steps. So as you can see, there's just benefits and downsides to kind of both, but there's no wrong way to write your novel. There will be people who will tell you, you absolutely must plot your book. And I do want to say, as someone who is a plotter, that is not true. It just means that you will have to find a way to make sure that everything is seamless. And really at the heart of all this, the point is that every book, every well-told story, it has a plot. It has some kind of structure to it. Now, I am someone who personally prefers the 3-act structure, which is what we're going to talk about today. But there are a myriad of different options and styles and ways in which you can plot your novel. And so I'm not going to say that this is the only right way. You have to find the way that works with your brain as you want to tell the story that you have. But I would experiment. Again, same thing. You might try plotting, you might try pantsing, but you also might try someone else's method, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. Oh, the 3-act structure. I love the 3-act structure. Now, I was a ghostwriter, as I've mentioned here before, for over 8 years. I ended my ghostwriting about 3 years ago or so, but during that time, I wrote probably hundreds of books, and it wasn't until I found the 3-act structure and really realized what it was that I was trying to do that I kind of found a way around finding my way through the dark of my novel. That might sound a little odd, but some of you might understand that. You might be in the situation where the missing piece for you is seeing what it looks like to plot a novel versus just kind of going wild at it and not really knowing what happens next. And some of you right here might be like, "Ugh, nope, no thank you. I don't want to plot, I don't care about it, and I don't even want to know." But let me beg you to stay just to hear me out as I describe the 3-act structure in the way that to me makes a lot of sense. Now, I'm not saying if you want to not be an outliner, totally fine. I'm not saying you have to stick to this, but I am saying that when you understand the structure of story, there's just something there that unlocks, I think, a bit of creativity that maybe you don't even know is missing at this point. And that is because stories are told in a specific way, and they're done in a certain way that makes sense to our brains. And so being able to see that written out could be really helpful for you, even if all you see is what I talk about and then you go and you do your own thing. Totally fine. But we're going to put this story structure up here. Hopefully you'll be able to see it. So I'm going to try to kind of guess where it's going to be, but we're going to start over here at the beginning. All right, so we start here at Act 1. I like to take my 3-act structure and break it into 4. And that might sound a little odd, but it has helped me to better understand this middle section because, as I said before, the middle is sometimes the hardest part, right? And one of the things to consider is that you might be really jazzed about your beginning. And you might think, oh, this is fun. This is where everything, I'm getting to know my characters. This is how I introduce them to my readers. And then you also might know the end, thinking like, oh, it's going to be big. It's going to be explosive. It's going to be awesome. But then you think about the middle and you're kind of like, well, what do I do there? So what I've done is I've broken it into 2. And like I said, I'll be listing off some books that I've read and some techniques from people that I've studied under who do this as well. So that has made it helpful for me. But so what I do is I have Act 1, Act 2A, Act 2B, and then Act 3. And that really, really helps my brain. So I'm going to break these down into maybe the highlights of each act. And as you'll see on this specific 3-act structure, they're pretty vague. They just list a few things. I'm not going to go through every single thing that they have on here, but you'll be able to see it via the link down below. So you can study that for yourself. But I'm going to hit the high points, okay? So here in Act 1, we're going to start with the beginning. I've heard other people call this the life segment, and you can really start your novel multiple different ways, but 2 of the most popular that I've seen is this life, this kind of like, we might think of like Belle from Beauty and the Beast, and it's just like, oh, her poor provincial life, and she's going through town, she's got her basket, we see like this is what her life looks like. And that's important because it's setting us up for the story that will be told about her later on. We have to see who she is at the start of the story to then understand who she becomes at the end of the story. But another way to do this would be to start with an explosive intro. And that would be the second thing that we come to here, which is the inciting incident. So sometimes that can also be, you can put that along with what's called a hook, which we won't really get into that today. But sometimes those things can be swapped. It just depends on the type of story. A lot of thrillers or action-based novels tend to start with an explosive beginning. He's dropped into the middle of the Sahara Desert and he's chasing after someone and he's getting shot at or whatever. And that immediately draws you in. But notice that's a very genre specific thing. So not to say that if you're writing romance, you can't start with action. You definitely can. But that's just something to consider, is like, what kind of story are you starting to tell? So we've got either our beginning or inciting incident, but as I talked about, now there is the inciting incident, at least in this format that we're following. And what that inciting incident means is it's really the thing that starts the story off. So remember my grocery store horrible story? Things got interesting when my purse was stolen. So to me, that would be the inciting incident. So my life as I woke up, I had to go to the grocery store, and then bam, something happens that yanks me into the story. That's our inciting incident. Then, as we move on to, we're going to pass a few things, but we move on to the next section, you can see there's a line between Act 1 and Act 2, and that's what we call the doorway of no return. And usually what happens at that point is something that, so we're talking about the inciting incident kind of bringing our character into the story. The doorway of no return ensures that they're not going back. This is ensuring that your character is committed to the path of the story. So your doorway needs to be something that is kind of like a decision that they're making that is going to ensure, yes, we're with them now from here until the end of the story. Now that brings us into Act 2, and I would say Act 2A. Now what typically tends to happen in this portion of Act 2 is that you're creating obstacles for your character. Now, let's take a step back here. I'm not talking about character yet, but it is hard to talk about plot without bringing character into it, because your character develops throughout the whole story. And if we're thinking about, okay, what does my character need to learn in order to have changed by the end of the story, those obstacles will be tailored to the character as they travel that path, as they've committed to the path that they're on. Those obstacles will then refine them and they'll learn new things as they go through them. So I'm just going to say obstacles for here. But one important thing I want to point out is this midpoint. Now, the midpoint to me is maybe one of the most important aspects of the entire central Act 2, right? It's the place that your character is heading. Now, I read a book, which I will mention later here, that completely changed my perspective on midpoint. What it did is that it showed me that everything is leading up to this midpoint, and what happens at that midpoint for your character then not only dictates where they go from the beginning, but also where they will go at the end. So it's kind of like a pivotal point in the center of your story. And what this author talks about is how at that midpoint, your character's mindset shifts. So they're going from usually inaction to action. So here, through the whole first part of the story, they might be someone who's a reluctant hero. They might be someone who's on a path that they didn't really want to choose, but they were yanked into it through that doorway of no return. And then now they're shooting through this story that you've created, through these difficult obstacles, they're learning things, and then they hit that midpoint, and then suddenly it clicks. Something happens, and they say, oh, I get it. And now it's almost like a 180 in a sense. Is that right? Turn around. And they're now going another way, towards action usually. Now this is going to vary depending on the type of story that you're telling. It might be something completely epic, like in a fantasy story or science fiction, or it might be something a little more subtle in like a romance or a mystery or something. But that midpoint is really, really important. So then from the midpoint on, we've now moved into Act 2B. One of my favorite teachers who talks about plotting uses this second half to do what she calls fun and games. This is Susie May Warren, and she talks about this is kind of like your lead up to this whole stuff that happens over here, which is basically going to be the climax of your Act 2, sending you into Act 3, which is the ending, the big part, right? So all through this second, so Act 2B, we're going to be more obstacles. I know, you think, obstacles again? But notice, there's a trajectory here, and again, I don't know where I'm pointing on this, what is going to be on the screen, but there is a trajectory of low to high and then down. And that is not actually even completely accurate, because in some points it might be like up and down as your character progresses through their journey of the story. But you're really heading to that very top point, And then once that is conquered, whatever that's going to look like for you and your story, then what happens after that is the wrap up. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So in this second part, so the part B of Act 2, we really are focused on disasters that continue to get worse and worse. So there's usually 3. Again, it depends on what kind of plotting thing you want to follow, but I tend to like 3 in that portion. So usually it's 3 things that they have to accomplish. It could be, for example, we've got, if we're in a space story, just because it's easy for me to think of these things, let's say that they have to get a specific kind of ship so that they because at the end they're going to be needing this, right? So they have to sneak onto a secret base and steal a ship, but then they run out of fuel, and so then they have to, steal fuel from space pirates. So that's your second disaster. And then during that time, maybe somebody gets injured, and so we're not really sure what's going to happen. And so then you have to take them to a hospital before they finally end up heading to their final mission. I mean, that's a very basic, simple thing that I just came up with, but it gives you an idea of kind of this series that is leading them towards this high climax point at the end here, but is also like fitting in with the story. So it's a ramp up, but it makes sense. It can't just be 3 random things that you throw at them. Otherwise, you're going to start to see your readers kind of not believing you. And that is really crucial with regards to any aspect of plot, is that it's very easy sometimes, especially if you're a newer writer, to sit down and just think, well, I'm going to have them do this, and this. And it sounds good and it sounds exciting. And you might actually write it all in there and think, okay, well, stuff's happening. But the crucial aspect of it is that we plot all of these things out, and especially in this continuing arc, this continuing trajectory, because it has to fit and align with our characters' goals. They're kind of coming up together at the same time. And those things that they're challenged with, those disasters, those obstacles, like I said before, they're challenging your character so that they can grow. So they have to fit in, they have to make sense. I'm sure you've either watched a movie or read a book where you saw something happen and you thought, that didn't make sense. Either the character did something that they would never do, which we're going to talk about that in the next video, or something happened that just kind of seemed out of the blue and seemed unnecessary. And that could be someone, the writer, who threw something in because they knew that something exciting had to happen, but they didn't really think through how it was going to fit within the overall context of the plot. All right, so at the end of this Act 2B, we're really hitting towards the climax of Act 2, which I would also say is kind of a second doorway of no return. So remember, that doorway, once you're through it, you're not going back. So it's them committing to their mission. And this whole part at the end here, or wherever it's going to be on here, can be very complicated, and there's a lot of leeway there in order to get to the point of your novel. But I'll just talk about some of the basics that tend to be what we write out when we're thinking about just a very basic plot. So Act 3, once we're in it, we'll then start with a ramping up. Everything is coming together. I'm thinking of like Star Wars, kind of towards the end of the movie, where all the pieces start to fit into place and crazy things are happening, but like we've got, backup flyers coming from here, and we know we're going to have to fight against Darth Vader, but we're just not there yet. So everything is preparing. The next section of that tends to be something where something bad happens. We call this the lights out moment, or the black moment, or the dark moment. It has a lot of names. This moment is really crucial, again, for your character, but also for your reader. And this tends to bring them to a point where, and again, this goes back to characterization, so we'll delve more into that later in the character video. But at this moment, this dark moment, it's basically the worst thing that could happen has happened, and your main character has to somehow find the will to fight through it. It's basically the thing that's happened that makes it seem as if all hope has lost. One of my favorite examples of this is in Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. Oh, even now it makes me tear up a little. It's the moment where they're in Helm's Deep and they're fighting and they've been fighting and it's just overwhelming and they're for sure going to die and everything bad is going to happen, and they kind of see, like, I think someone dies. I can't remember. It's been a while since I've watched the movies, but it's bad, right? Everything is bad. and then what happens? That hope, that light shining, which is Gandalf coming in like he said that he would. It's something that was promised to us before, and then when our hope is darkest and we're not sure that it's going to work out, oh, that thing comes back into play, and there we go. Gandalf is there, he's helping us, and we can actually win. So as you can see, you really bring your character through a lot, especially towards the end here. And that lights out moment often then leads you right into that, or close to that, final battle. And that final battle is just all out, everything is crazy. Now, I'm talking as if we're writing an epic fantasy or potentially a space battle or whatever. Now, this also works for things like romance, obviously, and mystery, contemporary, any other thing. It goes to speak of what has happened in the story so far. So again, back to characters here, but towards the end, you're going to want their lights out moment to be something that does make them think, all hope is lost, and potentially that is something which we often tend to see in a romance novel, that's where the characters break up. And then something changes, and that we could call is their final battle. And one of them has to make a grand gesture to come back to that other person and say, I was wrong. And usually something happens in there to show them that they were wrong, or maybe if they have broken up with the other character because of, maybe it's like Romeo and Juliet situation in a contemporary novel, and they just can't take the pressure from their family, but then they realize because maybe their grandmother comes in and says, hey, you loved him. Why did you let him go? And that is what that character needs, is send them back to the hero and say, I was wrong. Whatever. But as you can see, it really just depends on the type of story that you've told up until this point, what their dark moment will be, to what their battle is that they face. And then finally we get to the end, and that is what we would call the end or the resolution, because it doesn't usually just end. I mean, there is ways that has happened in some movies and books as well, but usually we show a bit of the resolution. Now, I'm going to step one more time back into characters, because here at the end is where it's really important for us to see that your character starts out as one person and they end as another. And so Susie May Warren often says this in her books, but she says that your character can do something at the end that they could not do at the beginning of the story. And that's really important for us to understand, because we have to think about that going in. So here is my little nudge to at least think about your plot, even if you're not going to sit down and write it out. Because knowing ahead of time who your character might start out to be and what the challenges are that they're facing can help you figure out all this stuff that happens in the middle and then towards the end that then brings them to this transformation, this resolution of the story. Now that was basically plot. I understand that I went through a lot and it probably was a little confusing at some points, but what I would advise is to definitely go download this 3-act structure, and then take a look at some of the books that I'm going to recommend here and find what works for you. And that honestly may be you write a few different books before you really hone in on what works. Or you might be like some of my friends, and every time you write a new novel, you try a different style. I really do know published authors who have done that. Or you could try my way, which is to start off and do a little bit of discovery writing to understand your characters, understand how you want the story to feel, and then take a step back and figure out, okay, well, now what do I want to see happening here? And use a plot structure to kind of help you figure out those things. No matter what you do, definitely experiment with it and have fun. Don't let yourself feel like, well, if I don't do it this way, I'm wrong. Or if I don't do it that way, I'm going to, have to rewrite things. Newsflash, we all have to rewrite things, and that is okay. But the main point is getting the story out on the page so that we have things to edit. Now, I wanted to share just a few books here that I have found to be really helpful. I will have links down below for each of these for you guys to find, but I definitely recommend before any other book, Plot and Structure by James Scott Bell. This book is amazing. And this is really what started off my whole journey of writing. I read it a long time ago, probably could use a reread, honestly, but it really hones in on 3-act structure and what that looks like. And his examples are great. I've read a lot of the books that he mentioned in here because I wanted to see it in action. Now, again, if you are someone who maybe doesn't like the idea of a 3-act structure or feels like it's too much, this may not be the best book for you, but I have found it to be hugely helpful for my writing journey. Speaking of his other book, well, at least one of the other books that he has, this is the one I was talking about, Write Your Novel from the Middle. It's super short. You could read it in a day. Less than a day. But it's so helpful and really helped me understand what it is that I'm writing towards when I'm working in the middle of my books. So definitely give this a read. It is going to help you out a ton. Another book that I have used in the past is called How to Write a Novel with the Snowflake Method. Now this is like completely different, and I don't have time to go into how it's different, but Randy Ingermanson is a genius. This might be a good thing for you to try when you're looking at different options, because it's not specifically outlining and it's not specifically pantsing. It's kind of 10 steps in order to write your novel, but he does it in a style that's actually like through a novel. It's very interesting, and I did find it to be really helpful. It's not something that I use now because I've kind of honed in on what works best for me, but this is definitely something to check out if you're kind of testing out what type of plotter you're going to be. Another book I don't have with me because I actually have it on audiobook is The Story Equation by Susie May Warren. This thing is awesome and super, super helpful. I got to sit there while she taught it, and so I was able to kind of see it in action. I've been in a few of her classes, just really, really interesting. But I have definitely taken many of her ideas and adopted them into my own plotting structure. She just has some really unique ways to look at things, and she is a romance writer as well, so she has other supplemental things that talk about romance writing if that's something that you're interested in. But overall, it's just a really unique way to look at story and character. I will definitely be mentioning more about what she does with characters in the character video. A book that I actually have not read but that a lot of people recommend is called Save the Cat. Some of my friends use this exclusively. It has 7 different steps, kind of like signposts as I understand them, as a way to, I guess they call them beats, as a way for you to write your novel based on the different beats that come within a story. This, I know, has helped a lot of people who maybe have tried the 3-act structure, don't really like it, and are looking for something different. So definitely go check that out if that sounds like up your alley. I've been hammering into plotting here, right? But what about those of you who don't want to plot? Well, I have a few books for you too. Story Trumps Structure by Stephen James is an excellent book. As you can see, I've got some tabs in it here. This approaches the telling of the story where the story itself weighs more important than the structure of a story. I've sat under classes that he's taught as well, and a lot of what he focuses in on is that you think logically through your story, so you're kind of telling yourself your story as you're writing it, and that is becoming more important than any structure to a story that you might be focused on. Now, I think that this creates a unique point because plotters can tend to, as I've mentioned in this video, write out their novel so specifically that if they get to a point and it doesn't feel right, they might push through because they say, well, it's in the plot, this is what I have to do. But that's not true. That's not how your story has to go. If you have a beat or a plot point or something that's coming up and it doesn't feel right for your story, you have to pivot. And so he talks about that in here. Another book that I actually haven't read but do own, more so because I realized I really am a plotter and I just can't get away from that, but is Writing Into the Dark. And this kind of also deals with that. It's writing when you're not really sure what your structure is going to be, or you don't want to have a structure necessarily, but it's going to be helpful for those who are looking to write in a way that is more pantsing. And then a final book here, Plot versus Character. I have not read this one, but it is recommended all over the place, and I do own it, so there's that. But I think that this is going to help you understand a little bit more about what is pulling you in different aspects. Is it your character's development? Is it your plot? Is it both? Because really at the end of the day, when we're writing our novels, we have to consider the fact that, yes, we may want a fast-paced plot like I do, But if it's not serving our characters, if it's not helping their development, if I'm throwing in an explosion when it doesn't really make sense, then my plot might be winning out over my character's development, and that is not a good thing either. So check out this one too. So that was a lot of information. Thanks for sticking with me through this all. If you've got questions now that you've seen that whole video about plot, please feel free to drop them below or direct message me. I would love to hear them, and as I said in the past, I'm going to be making a Q&A video at the end of this little mini series. So I want to be sure that I'm answering all of those questions that you may have. Again, this was just a very broad overview of plot, and someday I'd love to do a class that kind of delves deeper into this, because I've had a blast pulling together my own plot. So I have an actually, I think it's 2 pages long, 2 pages in a Word document long, that highlights specific points that I hit in every novel. It may make you feel a little weird, like, well, I can't just make every book the same, and I agree. But really what I use it for is to remind myself of the flow of a story, what tends to happen here, what tends to happen there. And the way that I get there is going to be unique to every different story, so it's not going to feel prescriptive. And there might be some times when, one thing's supposed to happen in Act 1 and instead it happens in Act 2 or whatever, and that's totally fine too. I'm not so married to my outlines or my plots that I can't make changes if I think that it's going to serve the story, and ultimately that's what matters. So for those of you who are beginning writers and you're joining me on this journey through this little mini series, please don't feel overwhelmed. You might need to watch this video a few different times, slow it down, take screenshots, whatever you need to do. Ask questions so that you can kind of understand better about this 3-act structure, about why it matters, and about how you can craft a plot that not only excites you to write, but also will excite your reader in the future. And if you haven't already, would you consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel? I've got a few more videos planned in this series, and then there's more things on the horizon. But until then, go boldly and write.